and at last I understood why old men cry. My mother's father walked his feet.
Before I start, I'd like to apologize if I don't speak such a proper English, and if I do some mistakes in my speech, and you can always interrupt me if there are some mistakes. On the behalf of the 100th anniversary of the First World War, there came up a debate in Germany about guilt and responsibility. And by the support of an Australian historian named Christopher Clark and his book, The Sleepwalkers, which was appreciated by German medias and the establishment, they made quite a kind of rollback, because the intention of that book was not to ask why the war broke out, but only how. And for an historian, it's quite a bankrupt to say, I'm not interested in question about why and only how. And he restricted his researches on the level of diplomacy. And for him, there's no such thing as society, as structures, interests, and all that stuff. So for German establishment and the medias, it was quite good. In that times, nowadays, Germany used to predominate the European Union, not to remember that there was a special responsibility of Germany leading the war. That's important to know, because after the Second World War, the post-Nazi historians repeated what the British Prime Minister says after the First World War, Lloyd George, when he said nations and their leaders slipped into war. There's no guilt, there's no special responsibility. That's what German historians mostly said after the Second World War. And then came up one historian, his name is Fritz Fischer, in the late 60s, and he wrote a book with the title Reaching for World Power. And he went to archives and saw all the documents which proved that there was a special interest of the German ruling class to lead war, to re-divide the world under imperialistic conditions. For that, it's important to know a bit of German history, that Germany was a late-coming nation-state, a late-coming imperialistic nation. It was founded in 1871, and before that time there was no German nation-state. And it's also important to know that this foundation of the nation-state was what we call a revolution from above. Because in the revolution of 1848, the bourgeoisie capitulated and came to terms with the feudal class, because they were threatened by the uprising workers' movement. So it's important to know that, and to know that there was that German imperialism was more aggressive. There was a stronger interest to rewrite the world. So there was maybe a special responsibility. Medias in Germany, even media's militias refer even to Lenin, because Lenin blamed all imperialistic nations for leading the imperialistic war. But what they don't say is that fact that Germany was this late-coming nation and had a special interest to lead the right world. So what we can see at the moment is this rollback on what was set as standard by Fritz Fischer when he told that Germany tries to reach world power. And they use for that this Australian historian. The other thing is that no one within this debate talks about workers' movement. It doesn't exist. And no one talks about the responsibility of the leadership of the SPD in Germany, especially, that they don't have tried to prevent the war. And it's important to say that because German workers' movement was supposed to be the strongest on the whole continent. So it's important to know that, because on that time in the World War, we can see the birth of social partnership. It was established at that time, and it still works until our days. So it's, in my opinion, very important to raise attention on that fact. So I try to illuminate the responsibility and the behavior of the leaders, the right-wing leaders of the Social Democratic Party. On August the 4th in 1914, the German Social Democrats gave their consent to war bonds in the German parliament. This agreement was the accordance with the ruling class to lead war. In his speech, party's chairman Hugo Haase declared the imperialistic war, which was going to start on that time, as a defense warfare, and justified this act with an alleged threat to a future of freedom from the bloodthirsty Russian despotism. Sounds a bit like propaganda of today. He confirmed, "In the hour of danger, we will not desert our own fatherland." The Kaiser was satisfied. On the same day, he announced, I do no longer know any parties. I only know Germans." But what did happen? 10 days before, the Vorwärts, which means forward, the main journal of the Social Democratic Party, wrote, "There's a great danger coming. World war threats. The ruling classes which suppress, despise, and exploit you in times of peace want to abuse you as cannon fodder. Everywhere the rulers must hear, we do not want war. Down with the war. Long live the international fraternization." How's to explain this breathtaking turn within a couple of days? Obviously, this phrase was nothing than a cant. By no means at all the right-wing leader of the SPD had the intention to prevent war. At the same time, thousands of workers demonstrate against the warmongers across the whole German Reich. Albert Südekum, an assemblyman of the Reichstag, the German parliament, and member of the SPD, met on July the 28th with Chancellor Bethmann-Hollweg. He ensured the scared Chancellor that the Social Democrats will not wage any, however natured, action against the war. So the SPD came to terms with the state and abandoned the aim to overthrow the government and the political system. This betrayal was the final point of a process that had begun years before. After the fall of a law in 1890, which illegalized the Workers' Party, the SPD increased rapidly. But the organization wasn't well prepared to assimilate the masses of new members and make them familiar with the revolutionary program given on the party congress in 1891. Many of the workers stood under the ideological influence of the bourgeoisie, or even the old feudal class of the large landholders, the so-called Junkers. In addition to that, the assemblymen the organization sent after elections into the parliaments were often and usually people from the middle class, because they didn't need any financial support. At that time, you didn't receive any diets, any money from So, the social composition of parliamentary groups didn't correlate with the social composition of the membership. In the chambers, reformists dominated. One of them, for example, the Bavarian social democrat Georg von Vollmer, made the case that the party could cooperate with the ruling classes on certain areas, especially on the area of foreign policy. At that time, the majority rejected these approaches. But beginning in 1896, influential Eduard Bernstein lined these reformist approaches theoretical. In his writings, Problems of Socialism and The Conditions of Socialism and the Challenges of Social Democracy, he claimed that the SPD always has been a party of reforms whose praxis never was in accordance to the revolutionary program of 1891. Marxist dogmas would hinder the party to come to success. He considered an alliance with the liberal bourgeoisie as unavoidable. So, revisionism was born. It was indeed this liberal bourgeoisie which was interested in a cooperation with the SPD under certain conditions. They intended to transform the organization from a class consciousness one into a national one, to make them a partner for their external goals, to build colonies in Africa, for example, and they had a certain conception that's quite interesting. What was called Mitteleuropa, Middle Europe, and this early conception is similar to that what we have now with the European Union. So it's quite interesting to know that. Followers of this position, the position of the liberal bourgeoisie, were usually representatives of the so-called new industries, the chemical and electronic industries, and their academic support. In opposition to the heavy industry, which sought to smash the workers' movement totally, they wanted to integrate the party into the existing system. And certainly, among the right-wing leaders, there was a feedback and willingness for this liberal imperialism. However, revisionism became the dominating issue of debates after 1900 and led to a strong polarization within the SPD. But it wasn't, after a certain time, it wasn't only the Marxists in the party who opposed more and more against the war. There was also this centrist group. And after for the third section to give war bonds, they opposed as well, and they get excluded from the party, so that they founded the independent Social Democratic Party together with the Spartacus group. But from the very beginning, this USPD wasn't a revolutionary group. From the very beginning, there were these contradictions within it. On the one hand, the centrist group, which opposed the war, but they only wanted to restrict it on the struggle on a parliamentary basis. And there was this Marxist group. So it wasn't really a party with only one program, and it couldn't work. But at that time, still, revolutionaries didn't want to build up their own organization. So we had to wait until November 1918 when the war came to its end, and we have to wait the example given by the masses when they strike against war, and soldiers and workers formed Soviets. This pressure given to the revolutionary leaders led to building a own party, which was the Communist Party in December 1918. But what we can learn from that is that there wasn't an organization which, at the right time, which could transform the war into what Eugene and what was Lenin's position, that could lead to transform the war into a civil war to overthrow the old government. The history of the World War has to be considered as well as the history of the defeat of the old workers' movement, and it's as well the history of new strategies against workers' movement by the bourgeoisie, because at that time fascism entered stage of world history. So, and still we have to learn from that social partnership which was born at that time, and we can see in our times. And so in my opinion, it's still important to remember what happened 100 years ago. And for further questions, I hope I can give answers. Thank you very much.
Years ago, he was half the age that I am now, knowing that he